All right. So welcome once again, and thank you for joining us for today's lunch break event focused on COVID-19 mandates in K-12 schools in Michigan. Today, we're joined by a panel of reporters who have reported on and analyzed the data on both the mandates that we're speaking about, as well as COVID and COVID rates in our state. Our special guests today are data reporter Mike Wilkinson, project editor and senior writer Ron French, and Bridge, Michigan and Chalk Peak, Detroit education reporter Tracie Mauriello. Today's conversation is moderated by our development and engagement specialist, Kathryn Dugal. Our conversation will begin in just a moment, and Kathryn will lead the discussion with our panel for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we will turn to any questions that you might have for our special guests. At any point throughout today's conversation, you can type your questions that you have for our panelists into the chat window. Please be certain to stay muted for the entire length of the conversation. We'll be gathering questions from the chat and making sure that Kathryn has those to pose to our special guests this afternoon. We'll take about approximately the last 15 minutes to answer any questions that you might have. As you heard announced in your speakers, we are recording today's conversation, and it will be posted on Bridge Michigan's website, bridgemi.com, this week. So if you wanted to watch again, or if you wanted to share with members of your network, there's an opportunity for you to share that video as widely as you'd like to. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this is a monthly engagement series that we do, that Bridge Michigan does, focused on topics that are important to the state of Michigan. They usually focus on things we've been covering in Bridge, or something that's a very timely or hot topic in the state of Michigan, and this certainly falls under that umbrella. Events like this one are made possible by the support of Bridge members. Bridge members are individuals who donate to our nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom, and any amount over the last year. If you'd like to join this membership community, we will drop a link in to do so in the chat. And that is all I have to bring to this conversation. So I am going, without any further ado, going to pass it over to Kathryn to get us started for our conversation. Kathryn.
Thanks, Amber, and thank you everyone who is joining us this afternoon. We are really excited to be having this conversation about Michigan's K-12 schools and COVID mandates. We know that there is a lot going on right now, and we're hoping to be able to provide you with some information and hopefully answer some of your questions today. To kick us off, Ron, I'm hoping, can you just give us an overview of the status of COVID mandates in Michigan's K-12 schools right now, and give us a little bit of background about what's going on?
Absolutely, and thank you very much, and thank you everyone for being such an important topic. And I know in Michigan we talk a lot about infrastructure and fixing the damn roads. Well, education is infrastructure. It's what's going to get us down the road to everyone's future careers and economic development in our state. And obviously over the past year or so, the big thing in education is hard to ignore, has been to COVID. How the schools handled it. In the last year, everything was about being remote. So many of them are remote, or going back and forth between remote and in person, and what the impact of that was. And what this year, everyone's in, virtually everyone is in classrooms in person. As an option. The issue this year is, whether what is happening in and quite frankly, it varies quite a bit from county to county, school district. Occasionally within school buildings, within grades in individual schools, it varies. That is because last year there was a statewide that all students who were attending classes in person had to wear face masks. This year, there is no statewide mandate. It was left up to individual school districts and individual health department. And the result of that is that you have this hodgepodge around the state. You have that have mask mandates and some that do not. And generally, districts that do not have mask mandates, almost virtually all the students are wearing masks. So you go from districts, often neighboring districts, where 100% of students wear masks, to neighboring districts where basically almost no one is wearing masks. There are, as far as what the mandates are, it's mask mandates. I know you hear a lot about vaccine mandates, especially in employment settings. You're going to hear more about that over the next week or so as the federal guidelines come down. That's not true in K-12 schools. That the vast majority of teachers and staff are vaccinated across the state, but there are not mandates. And there are no mandates for students. What you'll find inside the schools are that in the spring, you found that high schools offered opportunities to inside the schools, usually for students to get vaccinations with parental permission. You're going to see that a lot here in the coming weeks for elementary students, because now children ages 5 to 12 are now going to be eligible for vaccinations. So you're going to see some of that, but again, that's all optional, and certainly no one is going to be chasing Johnny across the jungle gym trying to stick him with a needle. It's going to be a parental permission, usually with a parent there. But anyway, so no mandates for vaccinations. Some districts have about 60% of students in the state are required to wear masks at the moment. As far as how long that's going to last, it's really hard to tell at this point. Some districts didn't put an end line on it. Some did. Some have already extended those end dates. It's really going to vary depending. It's going to vary across the state, and it's going to depend on what's happening with the numbers as we go forward.
Thank you, Ron, for that overview. I know there's a lot of information that we're going to continue to touch on throughout the discussion. Mike, you are our resident data guru, and you have been closely following both the COVID numbers and the school outbreaks on our COVID dashboard. I'm wondering, now that we're about 10 weeks or so into the school year, what are we seeing as far as school outbreaks across the state?
Well, good news is they actually have started to decline. And this week, there were 76 new outbreaks affecting just over 400 kids. A week ago, it was 101 outbreaks and over double the number of kids. It was well over 800. So that is a good trend. And cases in schools, masked or unmasked, have been rising across the state. But what we have seen is that the districts that have the policies that require face masks have seen that rate go up far lower. And it is a rate that, the rate for the unmasked districts in terms of new cases per 100,000 is 50, 60, 70% higher than the rate for those districts and counties where there is a mask mandate. And the national statistics have borne out that there is an impact on the spread if you adopt a policy where the school children are required to wear masks.
Yeah, that if the data bears it out, then I guess that's what we're seeing. Tracie, we're talking about how these outbreaks are kind of being reflected across the state. Could you give us an overview of how are outbreaks even currently defined by the state when it comes to schools, and how are they being reported? We have this data, but where does that come from?
That's a really important question, because there's been a recent change in the way cases are counted. So as Mike said, week to week, the number of outbreaks is trending down. But if you want to look back more than a month, it's very hard to trace that. So for example, like Mike said, this week there were 76 outbreaks. Exactly a month ago, which was the last report before this change took place, there were 99 outbreaks. So it sounds like month to month there's been an improvement, but not necessarily. So what happened was before, for something to count as an outbreak, there had to be at least 3 cases. That was changed on just about a month ago. I think it might be a month ago today. that was changed so that now there needs to be only two. I'm sorry. Now there needs to be three. Before it was two. Wait, I'm getting myself confused. I'm really sorry, you guys. Before 2 connected cases was an outbreak, now you need 3 connected cases, or 10% of a group. So for example, this accounts for if you have a class of less than 20 students and 2 kids get COVID, then that does count as an outbreak. So they're counting it differently. The reason that they're doing this is that the Council of State and Territorial Epidemiologists, which tracks all of this stuff, wanted to have uniform reporting across the country. So Michigan's Department of Health and Human Services went along with their recommendation to change how they count the cases. But that they changed it midstream makes it very hard for researchers here in Michigan to track changes here over time. So it's been very hard. And the danger of that is people are relying on this information to make decisions about their own behaviors. Are they going to wear a mask? Are they going to require their kids to wear a mask? Are they going to continue social distancing? Are they going to go to the football game or not because there's too many people? They're making decisions based on information that looks like it's a downward trend when actually it may not be.
But I want to just clarify. I mean, what I report about being down is week to week using the same standard. It's down 3 weeks in a row using the same standard. So yes, there was a drop in cases because we went from 2 to 3. But what I reported was it is a real drop. It's not a mythical drop because of the change in the standard. I just wanted to clarify.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, week to week, it's been going down, but to track it longitudinally, it's a little bit tricky.
Yeah, one thing that's important to note, when you see these numbers and you see them, 800 cases, say, in new outbreaks around the state, those are cases in the schools connected to outbreaks that they can connect to school activities and spread in school. That's not all the cases in the schools. The total number of COVID positive cases in schools are probably significantly higher than that. If Johnny gets COVID from his parents and comes to school and gets tested, he's still going home and it's a COVID case. It's not going to show up in the outbreak cases. But in the same way, he has COVID, he's sent home, and probably the kids who sit around him and in the desks around him are also being quarantined at home.
Right.
And do any of you know, so how is this being reported right now? When we get this data, where is that coming from? Are the schools reporting it? Are the districts?
So the school districts are reporting it to Michigan's Department of Health and Human Services, and the website is updated weekly. Every Monday, they say by 3 o'clock, they will have fresh data from the week before.
Okay, thanks, Tracie. And this is a question for the group. Are we aware, are there any certain thresholds right now that districts, and I recognize it's district to district at this point, and sometimes, as Ron said, school to school, but are we aware of certain thresholds that districts or schools are using to make decisions when it comes to their mandates around things like masking, quarantining, in-person schooling?
Well, I can tell you part of the answer to that. As you said, Kathryn, there's going to be wide variance on that. And in a lot of cases, the districts are relying on their local health departments to make those calls. So the health department is reporting to the schools on a very regular basis, what the trends are for the county, how many COVID cases there were this week among age 0 to 19 in that county compared to last week. What's the positivity rates going? So they're making decisions based on that. But one thing that schools do look for that is standard across the state. Schools only get, and this goes back to funding, schools only get funding for a day of school if 75% of their kids are in classrooms. Okay, so once you reach a point where there are enough students with that have tested positive, and usually there was a multiple number of kids who are quarantined for each kid who tests positive. Once you reach a point where there's that many number of students at home, often that is, and it reaches 75%, there's less than 75% of kids in classrooms, at that point, often schools make the decision to take everyone online.
Thanks, Ron. I appreciate that. Tracie, you've been reporting specifically on Detroit and K-12 in Detroit. Could you give us an overview of what the situation looks like in Detroit public schools right now related to COVID mandates?
Sure. There's a lot going on in Detroit public schools as far as COVID protocols. Superintendent Nikolai Vitti is really, I would say, going on the cautious side of things. For one, Detroit schools are among the few, actually the only that Vitti knew of, that are testing students weekly. So they're requiring tests of staff members and of student athletes. Other students, they are also hoping to test, trying to test, but it's with parental consent. And about half the parents have agreed to that. So Vitti is really celebrating this as a success. The infection spread rate is lower in Detroit public schools than it is in the greater community. So he's taking that as a sign that this is working. He's investing a lot into it. Detroit public schools received $1.2 billion in federal COVID relief funds, and he's committed 70 million of that, which is a pretty good chunk, to this weekly testing. But he's concerned that this funding, this COVID funding only lasts for 3 years. And at the end of this, if the pandemic is continuing, he's not going to have the funding to keep doing that. Also in Detroit, he's really encouraging vaccination. They incentivize staff by giving a $500 bonus to anyone who got vaccinated, and 3/4 of the staff took him up on that. There's a strong contingent of teachers that feel unsafe in school as long as everyone is not vaxxed. So they are looking for mandatory vaccine. Vitti is supportive of that as well. He's wondering how long people will accept wearing masks and testing and quarantines. So that's another factor. Detroit also is considering right now, though, reducing the quarantine period for unvaccinated students who are exposed to COVID. That would put him at odds with the CDC and with the Detroit Health Department, whose guidance calls for 7 to 10 days. Right now, between 400 and 500 kids a week in Detroit are being quarantined. Vitti says that that's not necessarily because things are so bad in Detroit, but it's because they're testing more and they're catching these asymptomatic positives. And as Ron said, when one student in a school tests positive, then all the kids that sit around them and all the kids they sat near on the school bus, they quarantine as well. So that's been a big factor in Detroit.
Yeah, and clearly we know that in Michigan, we've got these concentrations of districts like Detroit that have kind of a different set of problems for an urban school district, different than we might have in some of our more rural parts of the state. And as you talk about quarantining, we know that last year, a big issue with some of these rural parts of the state was when kids are quarantined, they may not have access to broadband. Ron, I'm wondering if you could just tell us, how are rural districts right now balancing the need to potentially quarantine students in these school outbreaks with the challenges associated with virtual schools?
Well, that's a tough balancing act that they have dealt with for more than a year now. Rural schools always have had an issue with broadband, and then obviously it was exacerbated last year when so many students were learning at home. And this year, again, all schools are trying to be in person. There have been some schools that have closed down for a period of time, a few days, a week, when they have higher rates. But the ones, again, and it's still a challenge, but they've had a year of experience under their belt. And for a lot of districts, that has really helped. A lot have had some investment in tops they've been able to send home, and a little more, and teachers have experience with synchronous and asynchronous learning online. And so it's not ideal. Everyone knows it's better for the students to be in person. And it's a challenge, absolutely, as far as broadband is in the rural areas. But they've had a year to try to find ways to create hotspots, particularly. Sometimes they have roving vehicles that set up hotspots, or buses that have Wi-Fi on them. So it's better than it was. Not a great answer for you, Kathryn, but it's better than it was a year ago.
Improvement is good, but it sounds like there are still some serious challenges. I know that some of these challenges and some of the difficulty with virtual learning has been a big debate in Lansing recently. Tracie, you just published a story about this yesterday. Could you tell us a little bit more about what's been playing out in Lansing over the enforcement of COVID mandates?
For sure. I think it won't surprise anyone on this call that mandates related to COVID safety protocols are highly politicized. There's been a lot of debate in Lansing, not just yesterday, but it did get heated up on the Senate floor yesterday as the Republican Senate down party lines passed 4 bills that would severely restrict schools' ability to implement COVID safety protocols. They really watered down COVID safety efforts, calling it a constitutional issue and personal freedom, and parents should control what kids do. The governor, however, is very unlikely to sign this bill. These bills, actually, it's a package of 4 bills. Governor Whitmer lacks the wherewithal, I would say, a year before an election to issue statewide mandates herself, but she also is not going to impede efforts of school districts to protect their populations. So these bills, one of them would prohibit schools from requiring students to get vaccines approved with emergency use authorizations. That is a designation that the Federal Drug Administration gives so that they can provide access to medicines and vaccines when no other treatments are available or no other product is available. Currently, the Pfizer vaccine is the only one that has full approval, and that's just for adults over 15. No COVID vaccine right now is fully approved for children under 15, but that could change very soon. The Pfizer vaccine does have emergency use authorization for kids ages 12 to 15, and they are looking as soon as next week, they may get conditional approval, this emergency use authorization for a pediatric vaccine for kids as young as 5. Another bill, I should back up for a second. This happened, this bill passed, I think, preemptively, knowing that there's a high chance that this pediatric vaccine next week will get emergency use authorization. Governor Whitmer is also being proactive, and yesterday, right around the same time that these votes were happening, she issued an executive order requiring her administration to begin acquiring or ordering these pediatric vaccines so that they're ready and Michigan can deploy them right away. So another bill that they passed yesterday would require schools that have mask mandates to allow parents and even the students themselves to opt out of wearing them. And it would also prohibit mandatory testing of asymptomatic students. So that's the kind of thing that Detroit Public Schools are doing, is doing right now, not as a mandate. So this is an important bill because it also relates to vaccine mandates, which is really the bigger issue, right? So what what proponents of vaccine mandates, it's not actually a mandate for a vaccine. What they are, what the Biden administration is recommending, what others are recommending is actually a testing mandate. And you can opt out of being tested if you're vaccinated. So it's actually testing mandates that we're talking about, not vaccine mandates. So this is a way to prevent the vaccine as being an opt-out for testing as well. The third and fourth bills really quickly would prohibit state and local health officials from enforcing any rules that require face masks, these emergency use vaccines, or COVID testing of students who are asymptomatic. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of fighting. Democrats are calling this a lot of rhetoric because Republicans obviously know that the governor is not going to sign these bills. Democrats are concerned that Republicans are poisoning the conversation and making people be afraid of taking these safety measures.
Yeah, it seems as though the conversation, with COVID has been different than vaccines in the past. Mike, we had a question from someone about how these outbreaks compares to past flu outbreaks. Is that something that the state has tracked in the past, like other school outbreaks of infectious disease?
I don't know. I mean, I honestly just don't know if there's a comparison there.
Yeah, seems like no, I just saw that we had a reader question, and it seems as though we know that K-12 schools in Michigan already do require a number of vaccines. I mean, not the flu vaccine, but it does seem like it's an interesting question.
Well,
Tracie, go ahead.
It's an interesting topic you have there about the other vaccine mandates that everyone gets as a kid, that you have to bring your little vaccination card when you're registering your child for kindergarten, usually. Oftentimes for sports and things like that, you have to do that. Tracie, you may know this, but I believe New York City mandated vaccinations for students. I believe a few districts around the state have done urban districts. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
Okay, but I think a few around the state, a few urban districts around the nation have done that, and it hasn't happened here. I could see, and as Tracie said, Detroit's at least, pondered the idea. But I got to be honest, from the mood of the public and the fact that the legislature is where it's at, especially you look at 2022, if a Republican were to win the governorship and the legislature were to remain Republican, if I were a betting man, it wouldn't be that we'd be moving forward with mandating COVID vaccinations. It would be that we could roll back some of the requirements for other vaccinations.
It seems like the way that people who oppose the COVID vaccine are differentiating this from other vaccines that are required is this emergency use argument. So at some point, presumably, these vaccines will be fully authorized. And then I think things change. I'm sure vaccine opponents will come up with a different argument or a different way to try to prevent these vaccines.
Well, and there's also a big difference. I mean, the mumps, measles, rubella, those are real dangerous for children. And obviously with COVID, if a child gets infected, they can infect their parents or their grandparents. But for them personally, they are the least likely to have a severe outcome. There obviously have been a number of cases. MICS, SC has become a problem, but very few are being hospitalized. But the bigger vector problem for them is they can carry it and transmit it to other people for whom it is a far more serious crime. But the measles, the mumps, rubella, those are childhood diseases that can have a very severe impact. So there are a couple differences there, and I can see that being part of the debate as well.
Yeah, Mike, as we touched on the flu, but as we think about children spreading COVID, and we know that they largely are in person, and as we get now into the later fall and winter is approaching quickly, what does all this mean for outbreaks in the winter?
Well, last year we had a lot of the same concerns, that there would be this, the perfect storm of the flu season upon us and COVID, but a lot of schools were remote at that point, right? And we were social distancing. We didn't even have vaccines at that point. Then we had the smallest flu season in decades. There were very few cases, largely because we were all wearing masks and we were separated. So this year, again, it's the same thing. They're a little bit worried about what is going to happen. I don't know if anyone has a crystal ball. But one thing that has happened, state nationwide with the Delta variant, and it's a really positive trend, is after ravaging much of the South and the West, it's come down, and now it looks like it's coming down in Michigan. It looks like we have peaked already here, but there are still 3,000 cases, 2,000 cases a day in Michigan. So the population is seeded with the infection. So if the potential is there, but it had a really positive sign, at least in terms of COVID, that we're bending the curve down. Again, since we're more face-to-face, I would presume we're going to have more flu outbreaks than we have in the past. But those typically aren't as deadly as COVID. And again, not for children, but for those other, the more vulnerable populations.
Yeah, and we know that like with this more in-person face-to-face action that we've all had in the past year, and with schools being largely in person, districts have been working to spend this COVID relief money on implementing new safety protocols, especially in preparation for the winter. Tracie, you've done some reporting on this. Could you tell us a little bit about how districts are currently spending some of those COVID relief funds?
Sure. Yes, Michigan got $6.1 billion in COVID relief funds, and districts seem to be spending it in 3 different ways. One is on trying to accelerate learning and make up for the lack of, or the, I don't want to say lack of learning, but the less than ideal amount of learning that occurred last year. So districts, not just in Michigan, but across the country, are really trying to ramp up staff, particularly in terms of math and reading specialists. But they're competing with all these other districts across the state and across the country that also just got a big amount of money that they want to use to hire these same teachers. So there's a limited pool. So that's one place they're spending money. The other place is on technology. They seem to be wanting to prepare if this winter gets bad so that they can more easily go to remote or virtual learning. Just about, I would say every district that I have spoken with in the last few months has said that they now have 1 laptop or 1 iPad per student. And before, a lot of these districts had maybe 1 per classroom, or they had, enough for 1 full classroom to use the computers, and then they would go on a cart to another classroom. Now students have their own, and students and teachers both are a lot more adept than they were a year ago at using that technology, and in particular at moving between in-person and virtual learning. And the third thing they're spending money on is to protect against COVID. So personal protective equipment, hand sanitizers. I mean, we see them in offices and workplaces and shopping malls everywhere. They're also around every corner in schools. A lot of schools also now have these tablets that when a student goes into the building, they stand in front of the tablet and it automatically takes their temperature and also notices if they have a mask on or not, and will sound an alert if they don't, or remind them to put their mask on. So there's a lot of these COVID protocols in place. I talked to a few teachers just the other day from Ypsilanti, and they said, teachers have a lot of concerns, but personal safety is not among them right now. They feel like they do have adequate access to PPE. They said that they feel, these particular teachers anyway, said that they feel very safe. They can always get masks and wipes and all the things that they need. So a lot of the COVID funds has gone there. And it remains to be seen. There's a lot of districts that have so far spent very small percentages of their first round of COVID funding. So we're waiting still to see where they spend it.
Well, it's certainly good to hear that that money is already being put to use in districts across the state. We did have a handful of reader questions that were submitted in advance of the event. And I'm wondering, as we think about schools that have access to these funds and that are kind of improving some of their virtual learning opportunities, we had a question that someone asked about what can be done, if anything, to ensure that schools are treating quarantine students equitably. We know that a student that might be in person versus one that's learning virtually may have a very different experience depending on the resources that they have, and wondering if anyone could speak to that a little bit.
Sorry, you don't mean we'll go silent, Ron.
No, Ron, I mean, I think this relates a little bit to what you discussed with rural school districts and some of the challenges they face, but have you heard anything from school leaders about kind of new things they may be implementing to ensure that kids that are quarantined are still able to access resources while they're gone?
Right. I think a lot of it goes to, as I said earlier, schools' experience last year and families' experiences last year. You know, it's being stuck at home when the rest of your class is in person right next to the teacher is not going to be the same. It's an inferior atmosphere to learn. There's no doubt about that. But as far as it being equitable, I guess I would just go back to the fact that as Tracie said, there's been so much investment in technology now. There's in a lot of districts, there was extra staff now. It's probably a long way from perfect, but it's certainly an improvement from last year. Is that the impression you get, Tracie?
One thing that Republicans in particular are very concerned about, especially when they're trying to pass all these bills related to quarantines and vaccines and masks, is they want to make sure that kids are treated equitably, whether or not they wear a mask, whether or not they're vaccinated. So it's not just whether or not they're in school, but they also want to make sure that kids are not excluded from extracurricular activities or from riding a school bus because of their vaccination or mask status, which of course concerns parents of other children who do want their kids to wear masks and to be as protected as they can be. So it's not just virtual versus in person, but there's a lot of equity issues around this.
Also, one thing, Ron, maybe you know, but you probably know better than I. But one of our colleagues, there's someone who had to go home with COVID and quarantine, and there was not an option to watch online. He got 10 days of homework sent home. So a lot of schools discontinued the synchronous learning, and I think most of them asynchronous. I know school teachers I know and schools around us because it was hard to do. So I think in many cases, you go home, you're not getting an opportunity to read online. Ron, do you have any idea what the percentage is? I mean, that was where my colleague lives. It's a fairly wealthy district in Oakland County, and they did not have that option, unfortunately.
Yeah, and and it's all anecdotal. So I'm sorry, I
okay.
how to gauge that at all, but I've heard stories like that too.
Yeah, I mean, we know that because it's district to district and school to school, it's really hard to kind of make broad statements about the state as a whole. Not to make another broad kind of assessment, but Mike, we did have a reader submit a question, and they're wondering, has anyone been able to estimate how many fewer overall COVID cases there would be if a statewide school mask mandate had been in place from the beginning of the school year? Has any research or has anyone kind of thrown out a number for that?
They ultimately will. I guarantee that. There's a lot of people who are working on these issues. I mean, I guess if you kind of extrapolate it out, you got to go week by week. So right now, the rate of infection is 50 to 70% higher in those areas where there isn't a mask mandate. So you could kind of try to go backwards and figure out how many that would be. I'm sure it would be thousands of cases. I mean, right now, people ages 0 to 20. I have accounted since September, which is basically the beginning of school, 27% of all COVID cases. Again, they're the least likely to have a serious impact. Before September, they only accounted for 16%. So so they've driven the surge, and they're probably largely driven it because they've been in close contact in schools. And it's not the 18 and 19-year-olds in college, because most colleges have been really successful. Ron wrote a story recently. Have been really successful at combating COVID, either through mask mandates indoors or vaccination mandates, which a number of schools had done. So this search has mostly been in K-12, and I'm sure there will be places that will try to look, or researchers who will try to look and try to determine the number. I want to go circle back to something Tracie was talking about Detroit. Detroit right now has zero ongoing outbreaks. It's the largest school district in the state. The second largest school district in the state is Macomb County's Utica Community Schools, where I went to school, and they currently have 9 ongoing outbreaks, including I think all 4 of their high schools, where it's anywhere from 40 to 60 kids. So, and they don't have a mask mandate. The 2 school districts are probably 15 miles apart. So 0 outbreaks and at least 9. So the evidence for there is that the information is there for research to try to put a pin on that and estimate the number. But no, I've not seen a specific number just yet.
We just had an interesting question come into the chat. I know that the newsroom yesterday was talking a little bit about some research that came out showing that the COVID vaccine lotteries were not an effective carrot to get people vaccinated, but direct payments proved to be fairly effective at encouraging vaccination. Someone was wondering if any districts, I guess it would be are planning to kind of offer some sort of carrot, some payment to families to get vaccinated. Obviously, young children cannot yet get vaccinated, but we know that that's coming very soon. Has anyone heard of any kind of carrot that districts might be offering to encourage children to get vaccinated?
That's not anything I've heard, but I really wouldn't be surprised, just given, I mean, Detroit gave $500 to teachers who got vaccinated. So it seems like that would be something that they would be open to discussing in Detroit at least, but I haven't heard anything specific about it.
I think because it's ages 5 to 12, I actually can't imagine a district giving a parent money to have their kids vaccinated, but I know they're going to try to encourage it in many places.
Well,
Sure, that could be an ethical,
Yeah,
tricky, yeah.
Yeah, one thing they might do though, because the quarantine policies are different depending, I think, Tracie and Mike, depending on vaccination status, this policies that are recommended based on vaccination status on whether you're wearing a mask in school. And,
Yes.
And so you can make a case that if a parent and a kid don't want to be quarantined, or at least quarantined for nearly as long, that get the shot. And if you've been vaccinated, if you're wearing a mask and the kid next to you gets COVID, you don't have to miss a day of school, as opposed to missing, what is it, Tracie, 7 to 10 days in a lot of districts.
7 to 10 is the recommendation, yeah.
So it's not a carrot, it's a stick. It's for health reasons, but I think that I know when I spoke with college students, that was the main motivator. I know a lot of colleges were giving away like $10 of food credit at the local Subway or whatever, but that didn't drive anything. What did was the fact that you're a college student, you don't want to be stuck in your dorm room, and if getting a vaccination means I don't have to quarantine, where's the nearest needle?
Yeah. I'm also hearing about districts that are adopting what they're calling test to stay programs. So unvaccinated kids who test negative and agree to wear a mask don't have to be quarantined. They can stay in school for that, whatever it is, if it's the 3 to 7 days that Detroit wants to go to, or the 7 to 10 days that the health department is recommending.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how it shakes out once the vaccines are actually released for young kids. Mike, this might be a question for you. We've had a couple questions now about the new variant of Delta that we've seen in the UK. And obviously we don't know what will or could happen, but what does the past tell us about variants and what impact that might have on the state if that's something that comes over here?
Well, it seems like every variant we've ever read about ultimately ends up in Michigan. We were one of the first ones to get the B117. What's that, Alpha now? It's hard to keep track of all of them. And in the spring, we had the worst outbreak in the nation when it got here. We have a large international airport in Detroit. We're interconnected in many ways. and it seems like there's no way to avoid it. I've not read about this new Delta variant. I wouldn't that be the Gamma? I don't know what its name is going to be, unless it is just called New Delta. But it will end up here if it ends up. We got a little version of the South African. So it all just measures how much farther along in the vaccination process we get, whether or not the vaccinations and boosters that we have will be able to defend us off. So it's so hard in this area right now to predict. I mean, I don't think anyone would have predicted what's happened in the last 3 months. It was crazy in Florida, then it kind of went up a little bit here, and now it's going back down. It's just a great wild card. This virus is proven so incredibly elusive, and trying to find an easy solution is almost impossible. Whether you're in Metro Detroit or West Michigan or up in the Upper Peninsula, the path is just it's impossible to predict. But it's something always to keep our eyes on.
Yeah, I mean, knowing that there's so much unknown in the months and hopefully not years ahead, it's really hard to say. But I wonder, as we begin to kind of wrap up our conversation, do any of you have any idea, like, thinking towards the spring, next semester for the school year, what can we expect? Do we think that there's still going to be masking? Are students that are vaccinated not going to need to mask? What can we anticipate in the next couple months?
Well, I'll go with uncertainty, but Ron and Tracie might have a better idea if they have forward-looking plans.
I think a lot of it is really going to depend on how compliant people are through the winter. It could go a lot of different ways in the winter. If we don't take action now, it's just going to keep spreading. So I think a lot depends on what we're doing now is going to foretell what spring is going to look like.
And if you want to guess, I'd say that the next battlefield would be what Tracie was saying. Republicans are now calling equity issues, which I'd never heard the phrase used that way before. But I could see next battles not being about stopping my kid from wearing a mask, but why isn't my kid allowed to play basketball just because they're unvaccinated and not willing to wear a mask when everyone else on the team is? Why does my kid have to wear a mask on the bus? Well, that's a federal regulation right now, but I suspect that's the next battlefield. I suspect that's the next round of lawsuits.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely been seeing this play out in school board meetings across the state. Do we, with the new vaccines being released for children, is that expected to increase? Are we anticipating that that's probably going to be worse than it is now? Or what have you been hearing as you've been talking to school board and administrators?
Well, the vaccines are all going to be voluntary. We assume at this point. So I'm not sure that's going to change the temperature in the rooms of the school boards. I'm not sure the temperature could go up much higher in those board meetings as they are right now. It's as long as parents have a choice whether their children are getting the shot, then I don't think that in and of itself is going to change the attitude that we're seeing in some of these board meetings. I think something that is another issue that we're going to see. You talk about the winter semester there, Kathryn, looking ahead to next spring. Something that I think reporters will be keeping a close eye on are school board elections in the spring, because I think some people are going to be driven out of school boards. And I think that some people are going to be raring to go to try to get elected because of this issue. The people I talk to are say, well, come on in, and they're going to find out that 99% of the time on a school board is spent like approving boring budgets. It's not about critical race theory. But I suspect that that's going to be some really interesting more politicized races for school boards than what we're used to.
I think we also can't discount the judicial system because there's lawsuits being filed all over the place right now. And you know, I think a lot of what happens may end up being up to the courts. And right now we have a Republican, or I should say conservative, US Supreme Court, conservative court, and slightly conservative in Michigan. So, you know, I think that a lot of it could end up being decided by the judiciary.
Yeah, Tracie, you wrote that story yesterday too about how this is playing out in Lansing, and talked about kind of where we're at in the authorization process for children. I saw that someone just asked in the chat if the Pfizer vaccine has full authorization for children.
Not for children, no. It has it's fully authorized for adults over 15, and it has emergency use authorization right now for 12 to 15, and potentially next week it could have emergency use authorization for the pediatric dose.
Yeah, thank you. You know, myself, it's hard to keep up when you've got 3 different vaccines and different age groups, and it's constantly changing. It can be difficult to kind of keep up with where we're at. I know we're coming to a close here, so if anyone else has any more questions, throw them in the chat now, please. And if not, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and especially thank Ron, Tracie, and Mike, who all have taken time out of their busy reporting schedule to help answer some of these questions today. I know it's been very helpful for me. I hope that it's provided some good information for everyone on this call. If you would like to view this video later or would like to share this with someone who is unable to join us today, we will be posting this recording in Bridge, Michigan later today or tomorrow, and our video will be available on YouTube at any time. I also want to remind you that you can sign up to receive Bridge, Michigan's reporting in your inbox for free. I'm going to drop the link in the chat here. So if you want to read Mike, Tracie, and Ron's day-to-day COVID information and education reporting, you can read that on our website. And I just want to once again thank our Bridge members for helping to support these events and all of our work. If no one has any more questions, just want to say thank you, and I'll give you a couple more minutes to enjoy your afternoon. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.